And I remember like 10 years ago, we organized a conference. I was overview of 20 years of independence of Belarus. And that was organized here in Vilnius. We organized together with Oleg Manaev. We even published a book. I looked through it and what kind of thoughts were expressed at the time. Also, we were talking about evolution, that we don't need any revolutionary events. And today, 10 years after that, it's interesting to look at what Belarus looked like and where it is today. And also to look at the comparison of what's going on in the regions. I believe that we have a good panel here to discuss the perspectives in terms of the civil society and the practical issues, to listen to the people who have been in politics and still are in politics. All of us will be talking in Russian, I understand, and please speak a bit slower so that the interpreters were able to translate everything. And I am enthusiastic myself to listen to your views about what has been in the country and what will be. So let's start from Pavel. Thank you, Vytis. I'd like to start with saying many thanks that we are getting together here despite of all difficult situations. It's a MinskForum, but unfortunately it's not in Minsk. But you know, Minsk is very close to the heart of every Belarusian, so I believe it's a very good substitute. And in the future, I hope we will do it interchangeably year by year in Minsk and in Vilnius. And that will really a reflection of our historic ties. I really heard you speaking Belarusian and how you put these words into your Russian language. That's cool. And to kickstart our discussion, I'll try to talk about some lessons without any structuring, just a few thoughts while I have been preparing for today. Number one, the Constitution of 1994 allowed Lukashenko to create his authoritarian system on the state. I can agree with that only partially. Yes, the Constitution of 94 really allowed Lukashenko to actually sit on the top of this constitution. And after 1994, Lukashenko was nationally very popular. He was legally elected with high support of the people, and he used it really successfully. And of course, there was a control of the power structures. When, you know, the ministers and other leaders were fighting for the power, so the power structures like army and internal affairs structures, interior ministry, they basically were decisive force in 95-96. Lukashenko needed these both elements to create his absolute power, and after he created that, when authoritarianism became very powerful in Belarus, so the people's support started to be not that critical anymore. So just Belarusians just found out about it only in 2020. And the control over the power structures has become enough to cling on the power of the dictatorship. And secondly, the Belarusian system, political system today, is functional and effective at the moment, and it works under the conditions when we have a good mechanism of giving the impulses from top down. However, the system cannot work like an autonomous body. It cannot work in the reverse regime from down up. And I believe that this is its weak point and the opportunity for democratic changes. And here also lies the stability of the system, because the people who come into the system, their views are changed when they meet a very different atmosphere from the Belarusian people who work in the private sector. And surely the people who are really talented and professional, they definitely are shown that they're not competitive in decision making, and they are made to keep silent, and they become as hostages there, hostages of the authoritarian regime. And this is also the challenge to fight against. Number 4 is about the discipline. That was very important. And the Western diplomats were expressing competence that it's good to work with the Belarusian civil servants, and they compared them to the Ukrainian civil servants, when the Ukrainians are very bad at the implementation of the documents that they sign gladly, and they close their eyes for implementation and their responsibilities. And of course, especially for the Germans, it was very stressful to work with the Ukrainians, and it's very comfortable to work with the Belarusians. So let's say that in 99%, they implement the documents that they sign with the condition that Lukashenko agrees to that. And of course, this is a positive sign of the discipline. And this is good for Belarus to preserve, especially for the future, when the Belarusians will be able to elect their own leaders, and when the leaders will serve for the purpose of the people. And also it showed the bad forms of all the system when it's far away from the moral values, when this kind of discipline becomes like a part of this whole chain, when the civil servants just receive the orders from above and they have to follow it unconditionally. Next, until 2020, it appeared, and this is what we were thinking, that the whole system is monolithic. And there are no objections to it and so on. However, in 2020, it was shown that that was not true, that the civil servants were also participating in a way with the protests. They were sharing the inside information in order to help the opposition forces. And the leaders were sure that the loyalty of the apparatus were much higher. And then they showed the existential threat for themselves. That's why now they're doing the liquidation of this danger. Imprisonment of political opponents. This is what they have been doing in the last couple of years. And we can see that this trend is very, very high. And this is a very important lesson that says that the more difficult is the entry to the system, the more stable this power system actually is. And it becomes more stable. And this is all for the moment. Thank you. Just to remind you, please speak a little bit slower. My Russian is slower, but you have much faster Russian, but please make it slower for interpretation purposes. Well, a big accent here is that a person within a system actually is lost. And before 2020, the system was creating itself on the discipline basis and so on. And actually we had previous discussions about that, and we're also saying that the system cannot be stable without the support of the people. Maybe for some time, yes. And definitely we saw it in 2020, that there are people who think otherwise, and people who are leaving jobs and so on. And I believe that Valery Kavaleuski will have maybe a different opinion about the development of the system during the 30 years. And maybe he will have a view to the immediate future, how you can get out of this situation, of the system. In spite of the discipline, it's becoming shaky. It has quite narrow corridor of maneuver, and actually there are more and more people who don't want to live in fear in this situation when they cannot express their opinion. And this is really very scary what's going on, because it kills all initiative. And where there is no initiative, so what can we talk about? So, Valery. So, thank you very much, and thanks for the organizers This is a tradition and we need to keep to it. And I'm very glad to be in the company of such interesting speakers today who are discussing the Belarusian situation today, and they are involved still for the future of our country. And thank you, Vytis, that you are with us throughout all these years. So I'd like to start with a personal view on the situation, how I worked in the diplomatic position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus. And I came there when Mikhail Marinich was there. I just worked there for 4 or 5 months, and then the ministry was united with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1998. Okay, and I left in 2006. I left the diplomatic position. I was able to compare the atmosphere inside the ministry, the behavior of the people. In 1988, it was the atmosphere of openness. They were able to express their opinion and even their political position. On my table, for instance, I had a national flag, and when the ministers were visiting the different offices, nobody was reacting negatively to it. And it was accepted like an expression of individual position. By 2006, the situation changed very much when people stopped being so open in their positions and their opinions. And actually, before I decided to leave, I was very close with a person who is now a very important person. When I was criticizing the leadership, he said, well, probably you have to leave because you are saying too much for that position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 6-7 years, I was talking with my friend from the ministry, and he said that the people there stopped discussing political issues altogether. And just everybody stopped expressing their opinion on that. The same was related to the use of Belarusian language. Also, the documents that we were writing in Belarusian language, we were writing in Belarusian. When Khvostov became the ministry, this practice was stopped. We were told that there was a negative reaction to it, and so on. And we felt the tendency of going away from what is important for us, of our national interests. Now coming back to mention the main important events about the civil servants. I would start in 1996 with a referendum that was in fact the constitutional reform that stopped all the democratic reforms in Belarus and started the authoritarian regime. Before 1996, there were some remains of democratic processes when people were able to influence something within the state system. However, the process was stopped at the moment when Lukashenko decided to scrap all the presidential office times, and the Belarusians actually stopped in believing of reforms and the constitutional progress. In 1996, after these elections, I decided to leave because I thought it was non-democratic to become the president for the third term after 2006. And then in 2010, the elections, the democratic process actually was not the instrument anymore to solve the problem, because the competition was actually non-existent. 7 candidates were imprisoned just before the elections. Many people were arrested, and the court trials started, and all the democratic movement was actually destroyed for a long time. In 2020, there was the last most important stage in this history when the state practically completely went away from the society. And we can see that with all the illegal actions, when the state powers actually went away from the legal resolutions of all issues in the society. And in the state apparatus, it could be partially explained by the processes that have been going on recently, and Pavel knows much more what is going on in the last months before 2020 and right after 2020.
Прилетают инсайды из белорусского министерства иностранных.
However, the signs from the Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually, we can see that this level of distrust is unimaginable when people are distrusted systematically. And this trajectory is going on and expanded further and further, and people start to reject all kind of opposition. And Mr. Madanov also mentioned, if a person doesn't have respect of Lukashenko, so he cannot work in any company. So you can imagine what kind of expectations they have in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have to be loyal, most probably 2 or 3 times fold. And okay, thank you very much. And we can see the evolution of the system through the personal lives of people. When revolution is going backwards, when the system itself does not trust the people, and we can see this disbalance of the system, and the development goes only through fear, repressions, and so on. And we look at any research on the index of democracy, index of freedom, and so on. So in our research, Belarus, by all parameters, is always at the bottom of the list. Apart from certain factors like civil society, somewhat positive, and Natallia here, and she is a representative of expert and civil society, is a representative of School of Public Administration Managers, is director of the school. And I remember that I was invited as expert for Lithuania to have a lecture at the school. At some point, the organizers said, that you are too tough. Sorry, but that wasn't last year. I said, okay, so what can we do? So when now we were talking about the civil servants, okay. I believe that at the time, that was a breakthrough moment when the civil society has to be a resource of the critical remarks and self-criticizing that would help for the government to develop further. And in Lithuania, we see the relationship with the social society is also not ideal, in fact, and this is normal, but when you can see the self-censorship within the organization itself, okay, this is on one hand quite understandable. On the other, there is the area where you can be very easily beaten. So, Natallia, how you can see the development of the system and the civil society within it? Thank you. Maybe I will start with the state system and the civil servants, and then the civil society. Yes, I'm trying to speak a bit slower. I start with our research that we have performed several years ago, and it was related to the comparison of the civil servant positions in Belarus and Ukraine. So we have different factors there compared, and the state services provided to the society, and our conclusions were like that, though the state services in Belarus were, one level better than in Ukraine, like issuing of passports and so on. These services were one level higher than in Belarus, than in Ukraine. But comparing the basis for this, of course it was better in Ukraine. So when it's something not very well based and quite shattered, it's difficult to believe. Well, Belarus, it's all politicized from up to bottom. It all works for one person. And in Ukraine, it was mostly depoliticized and separated from the top, from the changes in president's office, ministers, and so on. So, in Belarus, actually, we came to the conclusion it was much more shaky than in Belarus, than in Ukraine. Well, Belarus is the heritage of the Soviet Socialist Republic, and this state service and the civil servants are all the heritage of the Soviet system. And Andrei said that if a person came to the state service without any, preconceived notions, however, there is only one basis at the system. So you can say, no, my boss is not right and I will not take part in it. But here in the Belarusian system, we cannot do that. And there is no ideological structure within. So the system is without values, so it's able to create this conveyor, but when, all the servants, civil servants, waiting just for the orders from the above, and they're just the only ones that are right and correct for implementation. And we're looking at the groups of the civil servants, you know, here also to Ukraine and here. And self-censorship and the civil society. Civil society is a separate topic. Of course, self-censorship has been present and it is present. And we can see clearly how these organizations are developing, like NGOs and media. They come here, they can tell whatever they want. And the people who staying in Belarus, they're very cautious about their opinions. I'd like to say also, then when we have this kind of system from the Soviet times, it has been developing from the inside, but the civil society has been developing much faster, and the world around us was even developing faster. And in terms of development of iPhones and so on, all the society had to go alongside. However, the civil service, that is the state service, actually has become all political, and the society that wanted to live in a modern digital economy and to be the users and not only of entertainment and food, but also to take part in the civil life, which is an important part of standard of good life that every usual person wants to take part in. And that has become very clear in 2020, when the best experts started to leave, the jobs in the country after 2020, when we have a system of old times, when they're given PowerPoint and they are trying to, rule the society with the help of PowerPoints. And we can see this huge discrepancy that is very clearly seen. I will not give the prognosis so far and stop at that. Thank you very much. I ask about civil society, not because I am representing civil society myself, because there is no division of power, and the parliament actually is not able to decide anything. However, we saw, at least in economic matters, when the state wanted to cater in some ideas, and there were some kind of movement in that direction. Yeah. And before 2020, I was talking with you in different levels, and I was not actually talking with Vladimir before 2020, and for me, it's really intriguing to hear from him about these developments in the positive terms and also the skeptical views, how stable the system is in these circumstances. And I believe that you're an important person in this discussion. Thank you very much. I will start with saying many thanks for organizers who gave us this opportunity to communicate finally together. And I really remember very good talks in Minsk in 1997 with the start of MinskForum. I did not work as a diplomat at that time. I worked in Belarus State University, and the university was one of the partners, initiators of this initiative. I also remember how popular this platform was in the civil society and even in the state structures of Belarus. And of course, this society was very much interested in that. And today we can say that this interesting platform cannot be organized in Minsk. And I believe that eventually the MinskForum will come back to its proper place. And Minsk, Warsaw, and Kiev, of course, is very important today. So thank you again for this opportunity. I listened to the first panel discussion about the readiness of Belarus towards independence and all the opinions, which mostly I agree. As the direct participant of the events. And generally speaking, Belarus most probably was not ready for this independence. However, to say that is very much accidental, it would be erroneous. There was a joke at the time. There was a question how the Soviet Union will be disintegrated. The answer was that Russia would separate from Belarus. You remember that Russia even introduced their own currency and was still had the old Soviet currency at the time. And my experience in the Foreign Relations Ministry, yes, we were ready for that. We were striving for that, and most probably we were a kind of locomotive in the process of Belarus becoming an independent state. And we have many things to remember and be proud of. And at the time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus was actually the main coordinator of all the processes in the Union of Independent States. We initiated many processes and documents that had a formalized importance, like non-visa travels within the UIS and the documents for transit through other countries. You can imagine the situation in those years when our embassies did not have any consulate services, visa services. Of course, that was important as well for the creation and development of independent states, especially in the first years of independence. And we saw also the financing of this process from Russia. We also introduced our first diplomatic passports at the time. I still have these passports as keepsakes, and we're active with social society, and we're working with the majority of the countries in the world. So those were interesting and dynamic years of our independence. And Belarus was within the international trends. Belarus was heard and was praised in the European Union. Well, we still have many ongoing discussions, but this is the second half of our history. And at the time, the geopolitical choices were so important. And I remember the first draft of the document of our foreign policy, where we wrote about the strengthening of our relations with the independent states of Baltic states and Poland and so on. Also the three C's concept, those were the ideas that we were really discussing and which were thought about. And at the same time, we were active in the dialogue with the European Union, and we were close to the signing of the treaty for cooperation with the European Union, but that was an alternative vector. Of course, we really did not discuss even the cooperation between the independent Belarus and the European Union. Like the contract for the textile goods to be exported to the European Union. We were not able to do it because the initial contract was signed by the former Soviet Union and the European Union. Well, in any case, Belarus was trying to find its place within the international community, and there were certain perspectives were thought about, and we need also to remember the referendum of 1995, when we had to change our state symbols and the preservation of the capital punishment. And we had the first agreements about the union state of Belarus and Russia. And this vector has become actually the most important in the change towards going into the direction that Belarus went on until today. And that changed dramatically the relationship of Belarus, say, with the EU member states. And then in the last 25 years, the word referendum and the process itself has brought nothing good to Belarus at all. And that changed a lot. And also I agree with Natallia in terms of the state services and civil servants, all the vertical power from up down really our state has become more and more closed for the external world, and our contacts with our partners abroad has been closing down. And the beginning of 90s, most people in the system were not ready at all for independent rule and they were just, implementing all the orders. Like in the Soviet times, the orders came from Kremlin and implemented locally. Of course, later on, with the advent of the Western partners and the programs of technical support, now people started to learn more and more, to be more open and introduce new practices until 1996-97, after which we can think and say a lot about that. And I would name it like, back to the USSR, like one-way street movement, with some ups and downs, with some expectations that we were able to come back again to democratic changes. And there was a moment also with some official concepts of going forward with the reforms, and even Lukashenko even said that you cannot fly only with one wing, you need two wings. However, after 96-97, all the tendencies brought us to the times where we actually found ourselves in 2020, when it all crystallized into a situation when everybody started to understand that the old system is actually not working anymore, and that people are ready to create a new system. And today, all the actions taken against this tendency, they're doomed to failure. And I believe that Belarus will eventually take its proper place within democratic countries, and I believe that Belarus people are ready for that, and you would need to do much work in that direction. Thank you very much. When we talk about the vertical structure, we can compare it, and we could once also see that in Belarus it was easy to take the decisions and implement them, but then we don't have the diversity and within the system of development, we had a feeling that in Minsk we can, or you can, resolve all system technically very well. That all the wording of the documents are implemented, but the governance in the country is not only the technical thing, that the substance without the dialogue and without ideas and so on cannot exist. And then the whole system as evolution that should be present during last years looks like a regressive movement with no ideas, no contacts, even among the people who don't agree with it and who have such ideas, they're just thrown out of the system. And what I like here really, that all of you underlined that there are people in Belarus and in the government, still there are different people maybe somebody abroad and someone in the system. However, they're silent because it's impossible to work otherwise. But still, like Grigory Yoffe wrote in his book, How the West Misses the Mark, I believe that the name of Lukashenko was mentioned only twice here in our discussion, and this is very good, because at least abroad there was an understanding that Lukashenko is equal to Belarus, and Belarus is equal to Lukashenko. And I always have been saying that this is not like that. You have to look deeper into it. You have to look from different angles. Geopolitical is one, either together with Kremlin or the EU, and another one, either Lukashenko or the opposition. So there are different people in the system, there are different opinions, civil society, and Imaguru, you know, and other people who were organizing it here and in Warsaw. However, the state and the regime in Belarus have not used this potential so far. And the question was what will be done in the future? As I say, last but not least, floor is yours, Tatsiana. Of course, I should say many thanks to organizers too. And this is also important for me, important to say that 2020 was a breakthrough year for myself, and I understood that I'm not the only one who lives in Vilnius and works for Belarus. And today we can see there are more and more people who really find themselves in such situation abroad, who work for Belarus. And I believe that this can be changed. And even on the example of our organization, SYMPA, that is the Public Administration School, and we can see the transformations going on there. We can see also what Vytis and Natallia already mentioned. We created the School of Public Administration as a project of non-formal education, where the people could meet who were not able to meet very often together, like the state sector representatives, the society sector, the journalists, and so on. And on to using this example, we're looking at the evolution of the whole system. There were very little people who represented the state system, very small number of civil servants. Mostly there were business people and journalists. And especially after 2015, we saw the coming of more and more people related to the state system. And that was the progressive tendency, surely also certain tendencies of opening of the system when different sectors were able to communicate with each other, and people from different sectors, they saw each other, they saw the humanity in it. Yes, we're different, we don't know anything about it ourselves, but about each other, but we can talk with each other. And it was interesting, but when we look at what we got in 2020, actually the situation was very different when people were going through non-formal information with us. We saw that most of them were leaving the state system because when they went to Georgia, Lithuania, and Sweden, they looked at the experience in those countries, they decided that the state system has not given them any opportunities for further development. And we could see that our students were leaving the system. However, others were staying with the system and they worked in it. However, after 2020, we were watching who was leaving and who was staying with the system. And we noticed that a part of those people left the system, however, others were staying with the system. Then we asked the question, who stayed with the system and what kind of people stayed with it? Yes, some people wanted the changes, but they were not ready to talk about it. And others were very open about the changes, and they could not imagine themselves within that system. And they were also making a part of the civil society in Belarus. And talking about their own experience, I would agree with all of my colleagues, and I would like to draw our attention to a couple of more moments that are in the system. And it's important when we analyze it. It was been mentioned already that one of the important criteria that the people, why the people stay in the state service is loyalty. And after 2020, we can see that this loyalty has been growing tenfold or even more. In fact, it becomes the basic and key criteria according to which you can stay within the state system. When we look at all the legal changes, we can also see the requirements of the references when you can enter the system. You have to have a reference that you are loyal to the system, and the political system. Practically, this is what they say, that it has to be like that. So criteria of loyalty becomes the key one. And then we can ask what kind of professional characteristics the people may have. Actually, we can see the Institute of the State Service is not organized according to merit-based criteria. And then the criteria of loyalty becomes the key, and the professional criteria is going down and lower. And we can see that the system will not be able to function normally because the people will be losing their professional characteristics. At the same time, we see that today the main resources of the state go for repressions, and there will be no proper people, and also there will be no resources. And the only instrument today is the repression in the broader sense of the word. And I'd like also to mention also the education situation. It's really broad, and it's important also for the state service in Belarus, because in Belarus there are no good programs for public administration. There is the Academy of Administration under the president, and this is the monopoly in terms of education of those who are in the state system. So basically, all who are engaged in the state administration, they have to go through this academy. And in terms of the programs of the academy, they are very discussable. They don't have any research as a basis for education. And this is very much distorted the system of education. And then this official official channel of education is non-existent, and this channel actually it does not have any intercommunication with other channels of education because the other channels is the question whether they want and are able to cooperate with the state administration. And the public administration people are not just able to do that because it's not tolerated. So this is the system problem that we need to bear in mind when we speak about the system of state administration in Belarus. And the last moment before we go to Q&A session, in Belarus, very much has changed for expert organizations, for those who analyze the situation in different areas. For example, our organization is functioning from 6 foreign countries. One person is imprisoned, and all the rest of us are in 6 countries. Our colleague, Tatsiana, and our expert colleague, and Valery Kostugova, most of you know her very well. And because of their expert experience, they are put in prison now, and nobody knows why they're there. And this is a characteristic of what is going on in Belarus, what's going on with us.
Now I have many questions for Q&A session, but I also want to open this opportunity to ask questions, give remarks, comments to the audience. You can just raise your hand and get involved. Thank you. Thank you, Vytis, and thank you, everyone. And thank you for the organizers. Thank you for all the participants. It was really very pleasant to listen to this panel discussion.
Я помню, когда сам учился на SYMPA.
I remember when I was studying myself, and I remember about Tatsiana and about networking when some lecturers from the Academy of the Management were coming, and some of my provocative questions, and Markushevsky was saying, Vadim, please stop trolling this person, otherwise she will never come again. So most probably there is unique experience and data set and the inner rating of the students of SYMPA, and that means that in the long-term perspective, we are able to compile all this methodology and to compare. As far as I understand, there was no any complex research carried out, but still, what, as I can see the inner rating of SYMPA, I can see the representatives of civil society and state officials. It is a very interesting tool, I think, for research, and it's really interesting to look at this rating. Any conclusions on the basis of who came from which sector and what sector they're representing and how they studied in SYMPA? This is strange. At some point, we had more state officials, some years less. Sometimes a lot of them were sent to study in SYMPA. I remember several brilliant cases and brilliant representatives from the ministry. So it depends. But I think nobody works in the ministry. They left. So I refuse to answer this question. I agree we have never made this comparison because it is quite difficult. There were different numbers of participants, and also I have been a lecturer in European Humanitarian University and European Humanities University, and I think this is potential experience in Belarus. There is no normal labor market in Belarus, and it's not competitive. So since this labor market doesn't exist, it's difficult to compare. It's difficult to promote anyone. And the quality of human asset is usually measured by how many efforts and resources has the person invested in himself or herself. And out of the state officials, there were also very different people. Some of them invested in themselves more, some of them invested in themselves less. But for me, the most important was that there was a possibility for people to meet, talk, and after some of those sessions they were saying, oh, so this opposition is not that scary, and this was most probably one of the achievements that I see. This is not the only example in Belarus. This platform that we have been discussing now existed, but there were other exchange programs. I remember that Moscow School of Civil Education exists, and this a very similar exchange of experience happened between politicians and civil society. Next, Rabava, and she used this experience against civil society. So these platforms are much needed, all in all, because they give the opportunity or strive for confidence building, so that these people can be seen, that this is not opposition in its essence, that these people are not scary. You shouldn't be scared by them. Even among our international colleagues, when they speak about civil society, they at once say that this is opposition. I would like to very clearly define that those who fight for power, they are positioning themselves in one way, but those who are criticizing the power, they're criticizing the left and the right. So civil society stimulates discussion and variety, and this is the real added value to these processes. And I think regime hasn't understood it at all, or very selectively has chosen some aspects in the economy, in media, having in mind the balancing and talking about the geopolitical situation. We have been speaking a lot about the system and how it evolutionized, and now the question to each of the panelists: do you see any inner potential? We have heard some criticism already and some unstable moments that the system itself can evolutionize even more. Or are we talking about the stagnation period where evolution is just sort of rebooted? How do you see it? Because from what I've heard, there is a certain threshold that we have come to. System is not developing. New human resources come, but they are loyal. So what's next? What to do? How to involve? How to engage? Or is it better to use sanctions and to fight, and the regime will disintegrate as it is being pressured by the international community, and the end will come inevitably. So of course all this process is controlled by the state, and we have no chances for victory. Maybe the boycott, maybe this moral position, and all these concepts, they are sticking together, and they have been discussed in the Belarusian society for decades. I would say that we need to take into account the reality. Of course, it's desirable so that the system degrades and just disintegrates. But even if it works, it can work in a long-term historical process, and many of us might not live to see it. I'm not only speaking about social society, but or civil society, but I'm speaking about these positive examples that are really very useful here. Coming back to 2008, 2010, and the events of these years, and the improved relationships of Belarusian state with European countries, that again sparked repressions against Belarusians themselves. We have seen that the system hasn't changed, and everybody has seen what Belarusian authorities want, why they do it, how they act. And as in every game, you also have chances. And having in mind the cards that you have in your hands, you can still play, but sometimes you can just quit the game. For me personally, it was always obvious that it's better to play than to wait for the system to disintegrate and to fall apart. Your question about evolution, I have never had this illusion that this kind of evolution is possible, because the figure of Lukashenko himself is obviously not evolutionizing the character traits of this person. The thing that the person is very stubborn, doesn't want to admit that he has made a mistake, even speaking about the legal base or economy. If you know that 2 plus 2 is 4, but he wants it to be 5, this person is still going to persuade other people to say it's 5. And even if our national currency then is experiencing problems, it doesn't matter. Still, everybody is saying 2 plus 2 is 5, and he's encouraging it. So again, civil society and new circumstances can lead to democratic forces or civil society being stronger, and then this disintegration can happen now already. There are a lot of chances for that, so that we don't have to wait in a long-term perspective. I think that's all. I agree with Pavel that my forecast is negative, speaking about the evolution of the system, and I explain it by the fact that in our state apparatus we have Lukashenko. He has proved a lot of times that he can survive in the most difficult crisis. For many years, the forecasters have been saying that he will quit, that he can't make it. But year after year, he's showing that he can survive. He's able to achieve what he wants, and he's able to keep the power. And people who are in the system, and people who left because they couldn't live with this ambiguity every day. Though there are people who left, there are people who still stay, and because this person has the authority, we are afraid of him, and it is difficult to leave, and we are staying here, and we are adapting to Lukashenko. So this is another point of view. But it doesn't mean that the state itself doesn't have resources for minimal in evolution. People always strive for the better. they hope, they are searching for some other circumstances. Pavel is lucky that in 2020 Pavel was lucky to be working in the system during the golden era of, we can say, of course, it's maybe too glorious to say, but it was the golden era. And it was more open and more processes were open. So this process of normalization of relationship with the European countries was, the European Union countries, it was not only by the goodwill of the European Union, but something has changed in the DNA of the diplomacy apparatus. And people have shown that they have potential, they have resources, they can risk, they can show themselves in a different way. And these people are still there, they haven't left, and they're like water, they will be looking for opportunities to reveal themselves. Of course, it's difficult, but under this religion, we cannot wait for total change in the nearest future. I think the minimal evolution is possible because people change, the world changes, but in the state of mind as it is now, when everybody, it's just stagnation. Everybody is just looking at each other, waiting for, just trying to wait out this period. So evolution might be inner, might be very slow, but not significant, most probably. I will disagree. I don't believe in evolution in the circumstances that we have now, with the authority that we have now. And this is not even a stagnation period, it's recession. And it's a long-term recession for many years. And this is a way backwards, way where we're not moving anywhere forward.
Мне кажется, что
I think that the apparatus of the state that we have now, the state management, it is aimed at reconstructing itself, and it's just such a chain of processes. So the apparatus is as it is, human resources as they are, and until this system exists, it will exist. But of course, this apparatus will start to disintegrate when all the political system disintegrates. So of course, this is a correlation, and this apparatus will fall apart using its own weight. Of course, now we need loyal people. And until we need loyal people, this apparatus is going to exist. So maybe not the best human resources, maybe not the best competences are used, but this loyalty to the system is very important. And if they can provide it, they will exist. And I would say that this is a long-term period. But what is happening on the political arena? Of course, reforms on the state arena do depend on that. So looking at the experience of the Baltic states, Central Eastern Europe, we can see that all the changes in the state have happened after the change in the political arena. On one hand, if the system is disintegrating, most probably there will not be any Georgian scenario where state officials all leave. Those people who are in the system, some part of them are going to be left, or some new people are going to come. So again, this is a question of this reboot. How is it going to happen? Let's imagine that people, diplomats from Stockholm, Berlin, Kremlin are listening to you and your discussion, and they're thinking, so what's next? So we understand that the leverage that the Kremlin has are huge. But Belarus from 2014 to 2020 still strive to be the player in the region. I was not agreeing with that, but let's agree. But now Belarus looks like a hooligan, instrumentalizing or using as a tool migrants, landing the planes illegally. And the General Secretary of United Nations is meeting with Mr. McCain. And we know that Belarus wants to become the member of Security Council. And how is it possible? Vladimir, maybe this is a question to you. If you're saying that the system cannot evolutionize, then what do we have to, what the international community has to prepare ourselves for? This is a good question. I will try to answer it in short, and I hope that colleagues can add something. When we speak about United Nations and Belarus, for example, we shouldn't forget that there are two I'm sorry, I'm not getting the sound.
И как бы мы ни хотели, сегодня вопрос о непризнании Лукашенко мы заводим в политическую.
So, political and legal framework and Lukashenko. The logic of interstate organizations such as OECD and United Nations means that they are cooperating with the state and with the stakeholders who represent this state. Here we can say they can be legitimate, but the minister, for example, of foreign affairs, he can usually be the contact person, the one from who you can get information and whom you can give information. And the Secretary of the United Nations and his talk with McKay, it's not questionable, but McKay has also said that United Nations are the culprit because they are interfering with the inner affairs of Belarus. So again, OECD, OECD ministers meeting is going to take part, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are going to tell them, of course, how glorifying it is that this ministry has prevented the turmoil in the state and the treason and the revolution. So yes, there are global questions that on which we are collaborating, and we are going to be collaborating with Belarus. Although I think that the color palette of these issues that we can discuss is diminishing. And actually, most probably, we have to now speak about the thing that this regime has no moral right, has no legal right to represent Belarusian interests on the international arena. And we have to understand that. Exactly. You're absolutely right. I think that Belarusian regime is telling to United Nations or OECD, I am the system. What about those citizens? The person then is diminished. The person is not even in the picture. And in this case, notwithstanding the fact that international organizations have pro-state relations, although there are other there is another layer, the human layer, but still the base basis, and we shouldn't forget that, is representation of people and citizens. And I think that the regime has lost it, and it cannot in any way digested that this process is different in other countries. And are they so cynical and they're representing themselves in such a way? Or this question on such platforms like SYMPA, so are they just, do they really think that way? Or are they just making a scene? I don't know, because I know that you have contacts with your other colleagues who are still in the state service, working in the state service. Is it really the fact that they do not understand how the system or the state system should operate, or are they so cynical in reality? Because you are talking about a person, and here, you're talking about human rights. Here you go, the migrants, and do something with it. I will start most probably with the fact that my hypothesis about why in 2020, in autumn, why the state office did not disintegrate the regime, because inside the system, and all this time that I have been working and I have seen happy eyes of my colleagues, nobody believed that there is going to be a victory. Nobody believed that Lukashenko will go. And so there was not many were ready to do something for it. They were just waiting, and they did not believe in the success, because before that we had 25, 26 years and nothing happened, and we were not successful. So this is the answer why this system wasn't collapsing. If inside people would be, if inside the system the people were absolutely believing that Lukashenko can go, that it's the end of Lukashenko, then it would have happened and it would have changed. Why they are now doing what is asked of them, this also answers my question in the first part, because whoever is stronger is right. And at the moment, Lukashenko is stronger because he is the authority. I don't know how to call this concept. This is like fraudulent legalism. If you put on the paper, write on the paper something, Lukashenko is the president and you are the state official. And if the official person translates that, he's telling you what you need to do and what religion, as Valery has mentioned, what religion you need to take on. Even if you, with this religion, having in mind this religion, even if you do not go to church, but you are a religious person, you have a cross as a pendant and you wear it, so this is then now absurd. People understand what is happening in the country, but how do they explain it? They explain it in a way that there is no alternative, and they stay there, and in small steps they are trying to change something, and in this way they just think it's all comfortable. I have a family, I get money, and if they're asking me to do something, and you do not have any variant, yes, for Vladzimir Makey, for example, to put maybe put the documents or to prepare the documents for the talk with United Nations. So if you are not going to do it, if you are not going to help in any way, if you are going to only do what the state tells you, what the authority tells you, and it doesn't matter how stupid, for example, it is what they tell you, but if you're being told however stupid thing and you do that, this is how this monster exists. I will also add the answer to the question what the international community can do, because the system doesn't want to change itself. We have to understand that international organizations and interstate relations are always striving for collaboration, and they always want to come back to the algorithm of normal relations for OECD and for the United Nations, and the United Nations most part, because this is United Nations is striving for they sort of turn a blind eye on these processes. If they don't see them, they don't exist then. And it is very important for the protests to not to stop in Belarus, so that they are seen and they are heard by the international community. Because it is very difficult. All those consolidated programs and positions, the international bodies, they always want fruitful collaboration. And the diplomatic corps in Belarus, they are already sick and tired of all this situation. And they understand that they need to go to some meetings, they need to earn those stars, so-called. And nowadays, it's very difficult to get those, this incentive, to get those positive changes. So the diplomatic corps in Minsk, they also do not feel comfortable in this situation and would like to go back to normal relationships. So it depends on us, especially on the people who are in Belarus at the moment, how visual the protests are, how active it is, and this is why the regime is trying to suppress the protest so that it is not heard, it is not seen. That's why media is attacked, because if journalists are not telling about it, that if there are no visuals, if there is no text, if there are no facts, then it's not happening, it doesn't exist. And this is the way the regime has taken. So just so that the international organizations don't have what to work with, don't have any food for thought, and don't have any facts about the protests and what is happening, about human rights violations and so on. Same about migrants. We're sending you a lot of migrants so that you work with them and you forget about anything else. And again, there is no picture, yes? It's not visual. Now, speaking about international bodies, it looks like Lukashenko talking with Simonan. Let's turn the page. No, there is torture. The repressions are still on its way. There are political prisoners. Elections were fraudulent and false. So in these circumstances, when the civil society is being eradicated, those who see differently or believe or think differently also are being eradicated. So, Natalya, what do you think? Do you have any political picture of, let's say, someday somebody is calling you and telling you where Visa PM, SYMPA, come here because you need stars. We want normal relationship. Such kind of development of the relationship, do you think it's possible? My child goes to school, and till the end of the school year, I'm not going anywhere. That's a joke. And if we speak seriously about it, I don't see this kind of. We need to discuss it all together. So we are going to discuss and decide jointly if we're going or not. But I can hardly believe. Our time is running out. But then with Tatsiana, I would like to speak about several lessons that can be learned from this 30-year period. Good lessons or something that needs to be worked on or focused on. Because I understand that we can speak here about education, about different other aspects, but if you had one example, 30 years of development, 30, and the system is even regressing, that's what we're saying. How can we reboot the system? We were speaking about diaspora. There are people in the system who think differently. Maybe it is possible to find platforms for discussion with them. So, what to do on the international arena? Otherwise, we're coming back to the picture where we don't do anything. We're just monitoring the situation. We're just spectators. And again, 10 years ago, again, we're speaking about dialogue, about some selective dialogue, and we can see it's not sustainable, and the system is not developing. So where is the this chance? From the politological perspective, I think that the main thing that can be done here, and in many discussions we can hear that, is what happened is that this mass politicization of the citizens has happened. First time in a very long time. People are not indifferent to what is happening in the social political sphere, and this is very important. And I think that if and when the changes happen, they will happen because some critical mass of people are not indifferent anymore. So they are going to, they already understand that it needs to be changed. So they're not going to think only about their individual well-being, but we all can do something for our society. This is abstract and a wide idea, but it is viable. Everybody can do what he or she can do. The most important thing is not to be a spectator in this situation, not to stay in your own little house comfortably. And this could lead us to success. Looking back, I am reminiscing those three referendums, three events that we have been talking about, and this was active manipulation of societal opinion without media, without collaboration, without discussions, especially without analyzing the results. And I think in 1994 we could have said no to this if we could. So. In the future, the results of these referendums can again and should again be reassessed by the new referendum in the free arena, and the new referendum and its results will turn this page and open this new page that we need. What should be kept and preserved in the state system? I would say the state offered accessibility to services for society and for citizens, because yes, this is much needed. What about what has to be rebooted? All the system of the state has to be rebooted, because even the best reforms in other aspects, if they are initiated by the same people, by the same bodies, then it's unpredictable results that we can get. So the reform of the state service system in itself is much needed. Thank you. Maybe the best news here is that in Belarus we have a lot of talented people, and they are ready to work for state service, although maybe the private sector is giving them better offers. Some of them after the elections left, and we know that, but there are still many people, talented, genius people, who still work in the state system. And we do understand that the army of state officials in itself is a very conservative group of people, and they are not going to be active because they understand that they will be needed, and it doesn't matter what kind of authority it is, and they are always going to be needed. There are 30, 40, maybe 50,000 of them, and of course, and the fact that a lot of people have left the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is just unbelievable. And for sure, it's these people have made a heroic move to leave the system. But I agree with Natallia. We need the reform, a rebooting of the system in itself. We need to change the DNA, and that means that people could work in the system in a completely different manner. And again, we need transparency, we need monitoring, we need accountability, so that people know what the state is doing, what the state bodies, institutions are doing, and they could use this information for future elections and make an informed choice. Since I'm the last one to give my opinion, most probably I'm not going to be politologically precise, but maybe poetic. When they ask me what makes me optimistic when I look into the future of Belarus, I remember I remember this song, "Nobody needs us except for us ourselves." And most probably Belarus in 2020, they understood that neither East nor West, nobody, only us, we can save ourselves, nobody needs us, it's only we in itself that we exist. And I think that I'm feeling quite optimistic that Belarusians have waken up at that point, and they didn't give up, although all the circumstances are there to give up, and the authority, the state, the power is expecting that of the people, so that they give up, so that they get tired. So in these circumstances, when they want us to give up, and we don't, and we shouldn't do this. This makes me optimistic. Also, when I speak with my colleagues, and I've heard an idea about that the first time in the history of Belarus, such a big number of Belarusians, very intellectual, talented, intelligent people who have sacrificed a lot in their life. Every morning they wake up only with one thought, with one idea. I think this is cumulative effect, and it's not empty, and it also makes me optimistic. Thank you so much for our dialogue, for our discussion, and by summarizing, I would like to say that maybe this is a highly philosophical note, but there are technical solutions for many of these issues, and throughout all these 30 years we thought that it's some kind of technical solution. But if this technical solution and behind it we can see a person, a human being, then this might improve the situation a lot. Speaking about interstate relationship, if we see not only state officials but also people of Belarus, Belarusians, what can and should be done so that their voice is heard, so that their initiative can influence something, then we can speak about the potential that can be used. And then the country, the state, can enter a different level. So having in mind the 30-year-long development, having in mind all the disadvantages, And still, the regime could not influence the development of some of the sectors and of some people who work in some of the institutions and bodies. So even if in such conditions, we can still see the potential emerging, then we can only dream and we can only fantasize what would it have been, this potential, if the system was transparent. And this is what I wish for all of you, and I hope in 2024-2025 we are going to see you in the United Nations Council, and let live Belarus.